Okay, good evening. Welcome. Tonight's Halacha Shiur is entitled Chinuch, Parenting and Hitting Children. It's an interesting topic related to the Parsha because the Parsha is Parshas Yisro, deals with the Aseres HaDibros, and in at number 5 is Kabed es avicha v'semecha, honoring parents, and we'll see that this relates to hitting children, which there's a lot to say about this. In the short time that we have, we'll try and do it justice, but it's an interesting topic, and also to try and apply how it's relevant in today's day and age. Just a bit of background generally regarding Kibbud Av V'Eim and parenting before we come on to the actual topic of hitting children. Just some background from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. The Kitzur in Siman Kuf Mem Gimel, it's the second box on the handout. If you're listening online, and please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. Sif Aleph. One has to be very, very careful with Kibbud Av V'Eim and with Meira. There's two separate mitzvahs. There's Kibbud and there's Meira. Honoring and revering, as we'll see in a moment. Because the Torah equates Kibbud Av V'Eim with that of honor and respect due to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are three partners to every human being: a father, a mother, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If a person honors his parents, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, as if they honor me as well. That's the background. And then Sif Beis and Sif Gimel tells the difference between what is Meira and what is Kibbud. So in Sif Beis, Ezehu Meira, what is Meira? Ish imay v'aviv tiro, lo yamoid b'mkoimay. A person shouldn't stand in his parents' place. If a father or mother has a specific place, ham yuchad lo yamoid sham b'soid zakenim m'chaveira v'mokum ham yuchad lo lispalel. If he has a certain place where he stands with his friends, or a place where he davens in shul, v'lo yeshe b'mokum ham yuchad lo lehisif b'beisay, or if the mother or the father has a designated place, a certain armchair, a certain place at the Shabbos table, whatever it may be. So not only not to sit in that place, but also not to contradict them, not to side with them. I think my dad's right, I think my mum is right. It takes away from the reverence due. Okay, that's Meira. And what is Kibbud? Kibbud says the Kitzur, Sif Gimel, Machiloi Amashkeu. He gives the father or the mother to eat or to drink, malbish or machasa. He clothes them, machnis or moitzi, takes them in, takes them out. V'yitnenu lo b'seiv upon him office. And he does all of this, takes them in and out, gives them lifts, transport, b'seiv upon him office in a very gentle, pleasant way. Shafilu machilosu b'chol yom petumes. Even if he gives a parent very fancy foods, v'herlim upon him zoafim, but he does so in an unpleasant way, with this sort of a sad, annoyed face, he'll be punished for that. Better to give less in a nice way than something fancy in a less respectful way. So that is Kibbud, and Kibbud is pretty much all the things parents do for their kids nowadays. Giving them giving them to eat and to drink, food, drink, clothing them, giving them lifts, taking them here and there. But of course, there comes a time in a person's life, one hopes that the one has to help parents do all of these things. So that's the background, the importance of Kibbud Av V'Eim, and that's Meira, not contradicting, a certain reverence, not sitting in their place, etc. And then Kibbud is the more sort of physical aspects of helping, clothing, feeding, etc., etc. Now, coming on to hitting children, and this is relevant in terms of Chinuch and parenting as well. There is a famous Gemara in Moed Katan, it's also a Gemara in Kiddushin. The Gemara says the following: Amta debei Rabbi, the maidservant of Rabbi, who features often in Shas, Chazisei lahu gavra, saw a certain person to have a machi lebnei gadol, who is striking his bnei gadol, an older child. Amra, so this maidservant of Rabbi said, Lihaviyahu gavra b'shamta, that person should be in chayrim. He has no right, it's wrong for him to hit his child, and a grown-up child. Why? He's over the prohibition of lifnei iver. Lifnei iver means you're prompting someone or facilitating someone to do an aveira. And what's the problem? Says Rashi, the given the gadol, who since that he is grown up, shema mevayed ba'aviv, maybe he'll sort of kick back at his father or mother, and therefore the father has sort of triggered, has encouraged, has prompted his child to have that response. Now, the question is, in this Gemara, when it says you can't hit an adult child, and we're going to talk about today's day and age, about hitting children, we'll come to that. But when this Gemara says that it's prohibited, you put them in chayrim if you hit the adult child, how old is that child? What does it mean, b'noi gadol? Does it mean bar mitzvah? What is the definition of b'noi gadol? So there is another Gemara in Kiddushin, which on Daf Lamed on the next box, which says, there's machlekes tanoim. Chanech lena'ar al pi darkei, the famous pasuk, educate the child according to his or her way. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia, machlekes tanoim. Chad oma mishitza ad esrim v'tartin. That applies where you can readily educate the child and guide the child in that way and be forceful, if you like, with the child, between the age of 16 and 22. V'chad oma mitam nisrei v'ad esrim v'arba, between the age of 18 and 24. Now, why that age? So says Rashi, because botzir mishitza, less than 16, if the child is younger than 16, ein boidas lekabel teichachos kol kach. He's not mature enough to receive that forceful punishment. V'al tach b'disurin v'teichachos, and a person shouldn't be too heavy in punishing or rebuking the child. V'yois mi'esrim v'tartin yesh lachos shelo yibayit. And more than 22, he's not a kid anymore. And therefore he might rebel, he might kick back at the father. So that's the svara of why this sort of age range. Now, so the Gemara therefore says, when we're talking about that one shouldn't hit an adult child, we're talking about an older child, somewhere between 16 and 22 or 18 and 24. Interestingly, the Pischei Tshuva says, Avuzeh b'loi noso. That's only talking about a child who's not married. If that child is married, as soon as he gets married, even at an age which is younger than that range, he's already considered an adult. Now, the Ritva says that it's not dafka this age. Why? Because the Gemara says the Ritva there, Yehei bar mitzvah ein roi la'avir de makom ekalad aviv, eli yishtadlenu bedvarim. It's not appropriate, says the Ritva, to strike the child at all. Rather, engage him in conversation. Speak to him. It just says that because that's just the way of the world. It talks about a gadol, but it's lav dafka a gadol, and really it refers to any age of child, and lav dafka that range. Now, the Shulchan Aruch, when he brings this in Halacha in Hilchas Kibbut Aveim in Yerodeh Siman Reish Mem Sif Chaf, the bottom box, he goes Hamakeh b'nei gadol hoy menadin oisai. Anyone who hits an adult child is going to be put in chayrim. He'll be ostracized from the community. Shari oive al lifnei evel sitzin michshol. This is our Gemara. V'loy mikri gadol ledovazeh rak achab kaf beis oichof dalet shana. And that's the age. He goes for the upper range. Now, both of this is brought by the Kitzah and Rabbi Akiva Eiger as well. Two very important points. The Kitzah Shulchan Aruch says, "Asa lahakos es b'nei hagadol." It is prohibited to hit a child who is slightly older. Ve'in gad lezeh toleh b'shanim. But says the Kitzah, this is not really confined to an age. Ela hakol lefi tivah shel ben. It all depends on the nature of the child. Whenever you're concerned that the child will sort of rebel, will kick back against the parents, but dibur b'maisa, whether it's verbally or physically, even if the child is a child, even if he's a kid, you shouldn't do it. But rather you should rebuke him verbally. You put him in chayrim. So the Kitzah says that it's also to hit the child. It depends very much on the nature of the child. And we know this. Some children are tougher, some are softer. It's chanech l'nara pidarka. Every child needs a different type of approach and a very sort of bespoke. That's what good parenting is. It's not one size fits all. And therefore, according to the Kitzah, it's also to hit a child. And it depends very much on the nature of the child in question. That's really what it boils down to, lav dafka the age. Rabbi Kiva Eiga has a very interesting observation. Take a look at the next paragraph. It says Rabbi Kiva Eiga al yira adam letineg ba'oznai, which means don't torment the child. Don't whisper something in his ear and sort of threaten him that the punishment is coming. Ela malkeu miyad yishtek. Either you punish him there and then by hitting him, or remain silent. V'lo yomer lo klum, don't say anything. Because we're worried if you threaten him that something is, retribution will come. In Islam, the child will go out of his mind. He'll be so scared. That's quoting the Maseches Smachos, one of the Masechta Ketanas. Anyone who punishes a child excessively, who strikes a child excessively, they would actually put him in chayrim. So those are some of the sources about when this prohibition to hit a grown child, when exactly it applies, what is the range, etc., etc. Now the question really is, what about nowadays? Is it at all appropriate? After all, the pasuk in Mishlei says that someone who withholds the rod, spare the child, is the phrase. So that's based on this pasuk in Mishlei. If a person withdraws or holds back the shevet, the staff, he hates his child, and therefore sometimes children need strong rebuke. However, this is the real problem. The problem nowadays is that when you hit a child, it's 99 out of 100 times, perhaps even more, that it's not coming from a place of love and care, but it's coming from a place of anger and frustration. And therefore, whether it's a Rabbi in school or whether it's a parent, if they're hitting a child, is it coming from a place of love where you really want to sort of help the child or not? And that's the issue. And you speak to people who grew up, particularly in the years after the war, and they had some rebbes who perhaps went through difficult times in the Second World War. I'm thinking of one person in particular who I know quite well, who tells me that the rebbe was quite vicious, and he was a nebuch, a broken keli after the war, and sadly it was not done with chachma, with kindness, and with the best interest of the child at heart. It was out of frustration and anger and who knows what, and that really is the concern. If a rebbe or a teacher or parent has the tremendous midas and the self-control and the chachma, then maybe at the right age, the right time, in the right way, that's okay. But it's so unusual to have that. They tell the story. Rabbi Chasman, he was the mashkiach in Hebron, and the Reb Shalom Shvadron, by his own admission, he would tell this story, was a very boisterous young man. And one time, he was in the Hebron Yeshiva, and they were davening mincha, and it was a bit later in the afternoon, and by the time they finished Shemon Esra, it was already after Shkia. So there's a discussion whether you say Tachanan after Shkia for mincha. Either way, finished Chazor Sashatz, which is the time to say Tachanan, and this young Reb Shalom Shvadron banged on the stender and said, Yiskadal. So for a young yeshiva bacher, when you've got the hanhola, the mashgiach, the rabbeim there, you don't paskin yourself. You don't bang on that was a bit of you can imagine. And Rabbi Chasman, I'm almost certain it was Rabbi Chasman, he stops the whole yeshiva there. He calls over the young Reb Shalom Shvadron, and he tells him to get a Mishnah Berurah, and the whole yeshiva is waiting. He gets the Mishnah Berurah. Can you imagine the scene? He opens up the Mishnah Berurah, he tells him to read out a certain line, and the Mishnah Berurah says that whatever, I don't know exactly the situation it must have been, but it was close enough to just Shkia time that it was okay to say Tachanun, and he said Tachanun. And Reb Shalom Shvadron was so traumatized by this public rebuke, he apparently didn't leave his room for 3 days. Right? But he later said that Rabbi Chasman was a spiritual surgeon, and he removed 50% of his youthful gaiva. And he said his only regret was that he didn't remove the other 50%. That's what Rosh Shadron said about himself. Now he was a character, boy, and you can imagine him as a youngster, but the point is, you need a spiritual surgeon like Rabbi Chasman to be able to do that and to know how to do it, when to do it, who to do it with, etc. The rest of us are not on that league. So to hit children nowadays, it's almost always a no-no. Although Chazal, the pasuk seems to suggest, but that's if you're of the spiritual caliber. Just a few other eitzes. Number one, it's very important to clarify the situation. Sometimes parents, and we do this, or mechanchim, we jump in and we sort of judge too quickly. Just sometimes slow and be patient and just hear people out. Why do you do this? What was that about? Talk to me about it. And sometimes you get a different perspective of it. And I think also an important point is how generally to treat children, how to engage them, how to relate to them. It's important to treat children with respect. They're not necessarily your friends. They're not, in some circles, calling parents by their first names is ludicrous. On the other hand, it's appropriate to speak to children with respect. Students, children. It's an interesting thing. It says in Pashas Vayetze, Vayome Yaakov le'ochiv liktu avonim. He says to his brothers, gather the stones, vikach avonim vayasu gal, at the end of Pashas Vayetze. Says Rashi, who is his brothers? Talking to Esav? Who's Yaakov's brothers? Says Rashi, Heim Bonov. Shahoyu lo achim nigoshim elov letzara milchama. They were brothers in arms. They came to his help. But interesting, he calls his sons brothers. In the Kapitel Tehillim in Kuf Lamed Gimel, it says, Shir Malas LeDavid Hinei Matoiv Manoim Sheves Achim Gam Yochad. There's an amazing Sefer Chasidim. On that, Yehuda Chosid writes, Ksiv, he quotes the pasuk, Hinei Matoiv Manoim Sheves Achim Gam Yochad. Achim Gam, the words Achim Gam, begematria Bonim. It's the same gematria as Bonim. Achim Gam is a gematria 102, which is the same gematria as Bonim. Children should be treated with respect, like your siblings. It's talking about how wonderful it is for not only siblings to get on with each other, but also for parents and children to get on with each other. That's what it means. Whether it's two brothers, av or bonov, or parents and children, when they're arguing with a kas and there's anger. Says the Chefetz HaChasidim. So to a Rabbi and his Talmud. If there's fear or they're arguing the whole time, but not in Torah in a negative way, better to separate, better to just don't spend too much time in each other's company. Don't think it's because the parent or the Rebbe is in distress. Even if the child is in distress. If it's so difficult to get on with each other, just don't spend time with each other. Now, that's an important Sefer Chasidim. So hitting nowadays, whilst there is precedent for it, and maybe this was the way of the world in previous years, the difficulty, what's changed, is that we've changed. We are not of the madrega that we can do it, to do it not out of kas, and therefore to err on the side of caution is probably the best course of action, because sometimes it's he won't feel the love, even if that's how it was given. One final word when it comes to kibbud aveim. Is a very beautiful end of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch on this simon. In Sif Chaf Aleph, he says the following: someone who honestly, genuinely, properly wants to honor his parents, he should engage in Torah and in good deeds. That is the greatest kibbud av ve'eim a person can do. Because people will say about that person, happy are the parents who have raised such a child. But if the converse is true, and the child is not going on the proper way, the parents are embarrassed. It's a tremendous humiliation. And therefore the greatest kibbud is to live a life of Torah and Maisim Tovim, where people will say, Ashrei Yoladate. Happy is the person who's given birth to such children. Okay.